So we are doing this as a live feed, so that's where we're waiting. Are we good to go? Great. Hi, welcome. My name is Lisa O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director of Taos Housing Partnership. This is our second session of a 7-month speaker series, and I can't say how proud I am that Taos Housing Partnership is sort of at this space in our growth that we're able to put something like this on. And I'll tell you, I know several of you were here last time, that the anxiety for Alexandra and I starting about 5 o'clock on these nights is pretty palpable, because the worry is, oh God, what if nobody comes to the party? So I'm glad to see all of you here tonight. And the refreshments are good, so we'll keep those coming every single night. Second night, the other thing I want to say is that it is a live feed on YouTube, and we were so thrilled because our last session, we had 7 people who were watching from home. And it was like, oh my God, 7 people are actually tuned in, so maybe we'll hit 10 tonight. And then the other piece is that we are videotaping, so everyone has the opportunity to watch it again and again and again, which I hope you will do. So I want to, before I go too much further, I want to just acknowledge Brent Jaramillo, who is the county manager. The county is a sponsor for this 7-month series. It's obviously their beautiful building, their amazing technology, but they're also really powerful, strong partners with us and with Taos Housing Partnership. So I want to acknowledge the work that the county is doing with us. Thank you. So tonight, we have 2 speakers who came up from Albuquerque, and they're both with Housing New Mexico, which used to be Mortgage Finance Authority. And I want to do a very special thank you to Izzy, who is the CEO. When I started with Taos Housing Partnership, Taos Housing Partnership didn't have any operating money. So I took this job, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh great, how are we implementing anything? And we called, on Brent's recommendation, called Izzy and said, hey, we need a little bit of help. So I want to acknowledge that Housing New Mexico was our very first financial supporter when Taos Housing Partnership was kind of getting off the ground. And I want to thank you for that, because it got me to the certification training that I needed to right out of the gate. And it gave us those first 5 or 6 months to kind of get out and moving forward. So can't thank you enough for that support. I'm going to turn it over to Izzy Hernandez, who is the CEO of Housing New Mexico. And he's going to do just some opening remarks and then introduce Robin, who's here, who has an amazing PowerPoint presentation. The thing that I sat with in this, there's a couple slides, and I may ask you to, at the end of this, what were the 2 slides that Lisa is going like, oh my God, I'm so glad they put those in there, because there's 2 slides in here I hope everybody walks away with. But before you walk away, because I forgot last time, sign-in sheet. I'm going to send this back around. If you have not signed up, please sign up, because we have a $25 gift certificate raffle happening tonight. And no, I'm not doing that to do arm twisting, but we're going to do it every single time we're here. So just as another way to say thank you for coming, please bring your friends and sign up. So I'm going to hand it off to Izzy, and here we go.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us here. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So with me today I have Robin Powell. She's our Senior Director of Policy and Planning, and so she'll give you the majority of the presentation here. I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of Housing New Mexico, and we are legally still the Mortgage Finance Authority, or MFA. We just didn't feel that MFA really described the full scope of what we do. It might have early on when we were created, but now we do much more, and we believe that Housing New Mexico is a much better descriptor of what we do as an organization. So we are not a state agency. We are a quasi-governmental agency, and I'll give you a little bit more details on what that means. We were created in 1975, so this year is our 50th anniversary. We actually celebrated on April the 10th. That was when the House Bill 88 that created us was signed. So this is a big year for us. And as a quasi-governmental agency, we're a state agency. We're not a state agency, but we do have oversight from the state. And the oversight that we have is we have 7 board members. 3 of them are ex officio members or members that are in that position based on their elected position. And then we have 4 members that the governor appoints on a rotating basis. The 3 elected officials are the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the state treasurer. And then we are very fortunate to have the chairman of our board for many years now is Angel Reyes, which many of you know. He does a tremendous job for us there. And then we have 3 other board members from across the state as well. We also have an oversight committee composed of senators and representatives, both Democrat and Republican, that meet 5 times a year in our offices, and we go over the various programs, and they sponsor legislation, mostly for funding that we request. And Senator Bobby Gonzalez has been on that oversight committee for many years and represents the area very well here. We started out as an agency that just had mainly one program, which was our first-time homebuyer program. We had the authority, and that's where the Mortgage Finance Authority name came in, the authority to issue bonds, tax-exempt bonds, and those bonds, the investors in those bonds don't have to pay taxes, so they're willing to invest or to accept a lower yield or interest rate on those bonds than than if they had to pay taxes on them. So we take advantage of that, and we pass those savings on to the borrowers via below market interest rate loans. So that's what we did for many years. And then in 1997, all of the housing programs that were in various departments within the state got transferred over to the Mortgage Finance Authority, and that's when our mission really expanded to where we now have 40 different programs and about as many different funding sources. We are a statewide agency, and I'm very happy to announce that on our 50th anniversary, we've served over 505,000 families with the various programs that we have. The programs that we have really range the full continuum of housing, from homelessness all the way up to home ownership and everything in between. It so happens that the program that Robin's going to present on is one of the most, if not the most competitive program that we have. The tax credit program is included in this presentation. And it is also one of the most technical programs that we have. So Robin doesn't manage the program directly, and we don't have the folks that manage it directly weren't able to make it out here, but Robin is going to do a great job at presenting this to you. But if you have any questions that we can't answer, we'll promise you that we'll write them down and we'll get back to you through Lisa and make sure that you have the answers to that. So did I miss anything at the very high level? No? Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin. Thank you.
Okay, well, he set me up very nicely there. So, hi, everybody. My name is Robin Powell, and as Izzy mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Planning. So I'm very happy to be here and really appreciate everyone attending. So Lisa and Alexandra reached out to us a couple weeks ago, and they said, can you come and talk about housing? I was like, sure, anything specific that you guys had in mind. And the topic was development, rental development, and specifically in a rural area. They wanted to understand how a project comes together. And so I hope that this presentation kind of helps answer some of those questions. They are technical and time consuming, but the outcomes are wonderful. And so we'll go through it. If you guys have any questions, please raise your hand and we can stop and talk about anything. I tried to take out all of the acronyms, but I may have missed a few. So if you see an acronym and you don't know what it means, like, let us know, and we'll try to explain. Oh, okay. All right. I'm on the wrong side anyway. I'm going to come over here. Okay. I can't see the paper and I can't see the screen, so I'm just going to wing it. So the project that we're looking at today is called Vista de Socorro. It's a permanent supportive housing rental development that is actually starting to rent up just now down in Socorro, New Mexico. So we just did a little side-by-side comparison here between some of the demographics between Taos and Socorro to draw some correlations here. So somewhat similar population, The economies are different in that Taos is more tourism, art, and recreation, while Socorro is more agriculture, education, and labs. You can see the median incomes there. Taos County has a little bit higher median income, a little bit lower poverty rate, a little bit higher median rental rates. Both within proximity to tribal or Navajo lands, both with higher education facilities and healthcare facilities in the area. Yep. Okay, thanks. I'm gonna have to fix that. So, what are some of the challenges that come up when we're talking about, especially in rural communities, about development? Economies of scale, right? In more urban areas, you have probably larger developments that are going in and are easier to maybe lower some of the costs on. Rural communities tend to have higher poverty rates and higher rent burdens, meaning that people are paying a higher percentage of their incomes for their housing. And I would say aging and inadequate infrastructure is something that happens in rural or urban environments. I think it's a nationwide problem. Scarcity of contractors. There can be limitations when it comes to planning and zoning regulations in small areas, but I think that also applies to rural areas. And then it's always difficult layering different financial financing options for smaller projects. I'm going to come over here. I'm sorry. I'm just. No, we need to work on it. Yeah, it's okay. So. Again, just comparing Taos and Socorro, there's similarities between the two areas. Lower income levels as compared to maybe the rest of the state, high construction costs, and limited rental markets. Taos faces high land cost. Socorro, for example, needs more housing for students and workers. I'm sure Taos could say the same thing. They need more housing for workforce. And partnerships, we mentioned the county coming here and providing support. That is a huge factor when it comes to making these projects successful. So what is LIHTC? LIHTC stands for Low Income Housing Tax Credit. It's a federal program. These tax credits produce about 90% of all the affordable housing in the United States. When we say affordable housing, that means that the units that are created are income restricted, meaning that the person who lives there has to earn a percentage of area median income. Usually it's capped at around 80% area median income, going all the way down to the bottom, the lowest income earners in our country. And the goal is to have these rents affordable for people so that they're not paying hopefully more than around 30% of their income. In order to make that happen, there has to be large subsidies involved. So what happens with the tax credits is they leverage also the private market investments to fund public good. And they have flexibility, so they can be used statewide, rural, urban, and suburban communities, and really develop housing units through public and private partnerships. So what happens is the tax credits are provided to the developer to build or rehabilitate housing units. The developers then sell off those credits to investors in exchange for equity, and that equity reduces down the need for debt financing, which then in turn makes the rental units, making them, the lower price on them more affordable and more possible, because you still need operating income. And then with the tax credit part of that is that the federal regulations require that they're maintained at an affordable level for at least 30 years. Some go out as far as 40 years. And I'm just going to stop for a second and go back a little bit, because I think one of the things that is missing from this presentation that I was thinking about is And there's no slide for this, but before you ever get the tax credit allocation, there's a ton of pre-development work that goes into a project. Some of the things I thought of were you have to find a place to build, right? You have to find a site. You have to do a market study to find out what your community needs. Who can afford these units? How many do you need? You have to build the relationships within the community to say, okay, it's going to take a lot of people to get this done, so who's on board and how do we move forward? You have to go through training. It's a very technical process. I think the applications can be 900 pages of documentation. So there's training that's provided, and you have to get your application ready to even submit to Housing New Mexico. And then also securing funding. Tax credits are part of the funding, but there's also conventional funding, private funding that comes into play. And so all of these things sort of happen before you ever even submit your application to get an award. So just a little bit of context there. I heard somebody say, oh geez, I know it's overwhelming, but it can be done, I promise you. So typically, after that developer receives a tax credit allocation, as I mentioned, it's sold to an investor that gives the upfront equity. It can vary as far as how much equity goes into a project. In this example, it was about 85 cents on the dollar. So for every $1 of tax credit, 85 cents in equity was provided. And then the investors receive the tax credit annually for up to 10 years after they provide that equity. Yes.
I didn't know what your next slide was going to be, so I didn't know if we were moving on from LIHTC or not. But I know you probably don't know the answer to this question, but do you know the couple of the examples of the LIHTC projects here in Taos that we could give these folks an example of that they probably drive past on a daily basis? So.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know the names off the top of my head, but I know Izzy's going to look them up for you.
Or between me or Angel, we could probably answer.
Some. I know of at least one, and you might have multiple properties here.
I think I can think of three right off the top. There's the units behind the high school, and then off of Gusdorf, and then there's the ones off of Herdner. And both of those, at least the one off of Herdner, the town of Taos provided the property for that to help bring down that. And the county had transferred some property over to the town, and then the town transferred it over to the developer. So I know there's a few LIHTC projects, and I was just trying to provide the folks with these examples.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and you can sort of drive by and see, what the outcomes of these are. So we'll try to get the years that those projects were sort of in the development stages, so you can get a sense of how old they are. And Izzy has some information.
We have a total of 7 LIHTC developments or rental developments here. I'll just name them by name without giving you the address. So there's Bella Vista Apartments, El Cerrito, we have Loma Parda, we have Mariposa Apartments, there's 80, there's Taos House, Haus, and then Tierra Montosa Phase 2. And I have addresses for those if you need them.
Thank you. And thank you I think that's a great example of, a way to share kind of about this program. So LIHTC equity alone is not enough. So as I mentioned, LIHTC can provide a large amount of the equity on the 4%. So there's 2 different tax credits. There's a 9% tax credit and a 4% tax credit. Typically, on a 4% project, the tax credit only covers maybe up to 30% of the total development costs for those units, up to maybe 70 or 80% on the 9% side. So limiting the amount of rent that can be charged also limits the amount of debt that can be taken into a project, because they need to be able to operate. And so they're not going to generate enough cash flow with lowered rents. And that's where gap funding comes into place. So a combination of LIHTC equity and reduced debt leaves a gap that needs to be filled. And Housing New Mexico comes in to provide some other resources, federal and state resources, and other entities also provide additional gap funding. So this is the first slide that I'm going to guess that Lisa wants you guys to remember, but I don't know for sure. So this is just kind of I saw this one time and I thought that it was a good way to remember how to sort of think about a LIHTC project. There's many layers of it, and we just mentioned 3, which is the conventional debt, the gap financing, and the tax credit equity. So we'll go through some development challenges. Financial feasibility obviously is something that is challenging. Making sure that you have enough operating income. We typically see very high construction costs relative to the project scale. You may have difficulty in certain economies attracting investors or syndicators to buy those tax credits. So those relationships and building those relationships up front is important. And then there's also unforeseen market events. We'll look at Vista de Socorro here, getting into some of the technical details of that. Was being developed during COVID. So that was a market condition that nobody predicted that had a huge impact on the project. Also, you need infrastructure to these projects. A lot of time land is available, but it may not have a road, it may not have electricity, it may not have water to it. So all of those are required and can drive up costs. Making sure before you get started or as you're getting started that your zoning and land use is compliant for multifamily. Making sure that the community is engaged, and getting local support. A lot of times you'll see NIMBYism, not in my backyard, from people that probably have maybe a skewed perception of what affordable housing is, but they can definitely create challenges for communities when they're trying to put developments together. And then there's regulatory hurdles. With federal funding, you do have a lot of regulatory challenges, and you need to understand what those are before you get started so that you don't become out of compliance. There's also environmental reviews that are required by the federal government, and other areas. If you're doing something on tribal land, you have, need to be aware of cultural issues or other things there. I didn't know what SHPO was. That's the State Historic Preservation Office. So if you're developing in a preservation area, you'll probably have to deal with that. So this is Vista de Socorro. This is the renderings. So when this project initially was scoped out, it was 32 units, so not huge. Initial total development costs came in at $6.1 million, which breaks down to $188,000 a unit, or about $122 a square foot. Not bad, right? They received initially $495,000 in tax credits. As you can see the rendering here, they have a U-shaped design with community space and 2 residential wings, and then they had 7 units set aside for special needs households. Special needs households also indicate that there's going to be wraparound services provided for those special needs individuals. That could include case management and support. They require a little bit more subsidy because you have to, pay people to be case managers. And so you have to sort of build that in up front. There's also points associated with different, like kind of who you're serving. So based on the state's priorities, the qualified allocation plan, which is the which kind of guides the LIHTC awards, they can give extra points for serving underserved household or underserved populations. Something like a tribal development might get extra points. Permanent supportive housing also gets higher points. Extra points can be awarded for senior households, for families with children. So developers sort of chase these points. That's how they get to the top on scoring. And so all of that is taken into consideration when you're developing how many units, who you're going to serve, what the income levels are going to be. You can see here up in the corner, it kind of talks about how that $6.1 million was broken down. So 74% was hard construction costs. 12% was soft costs. This includes attorneys, consultants, staff that put loans together, all of these things. Some reserves, about 2.3% in reserves, and then a developer fee, which came out to about 10.9%. I have a timeline, so I'll show you that. I can't remember. 21-ish. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any plan for these developments to have, say, a laundry or a meeting place for people to interact rather than all in their own little spaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So, all different kinds of amenities can be built in, and again, I think it depends on the population that's being served. So playgrounds, sometimes a pool, community rooms, definitely laundry facilities. If they're not in unit, they're typically on site. And so for a senior community, it might be different than a community that is targeting children, but all of that is taken into consideration when the application is submitted. So for this project, we kind of went through those development challenges in a previous slide, and this slide talks about specifically how this project sort of handled some of that. So they got land donation from the city of Socorro. I put valued at, but we actually couldn't come up with a value for that in any of the paperwork. So just don't ask me that question because I don't know what the value of that land was, sorry. The developer also had a good relationship with their equity investor, so they got 88 cents on the dollar for their tax credit pricing, which is a little bit higher than we would typically see. They also got some project-based vouchers, so housing vouchers that stay with the project, they don't go with the person, and so that provides a little bit of that rental income. And then we'll talk a little bit about how they dealt with the unforeseen market events, i.e. COVID. They built this this development just adjacent to medical services and public transportation. So the infrastructure was easily accessible, and then the city of Socorro provided infrastructure development to the project, and that's that's a huge piece of making any project feasible. They had their zoning in place before they started the project, so they didn't run into any unforeseen issues there. They got a contractor early on, and we can talk a little bit about how hard that is because it's a years-long process to secure. So to have a contractor and say, we're going to start on this date. No, we need to move it back 3 months. No, we need to move it back 3 months. It's hard to keep those contractors in place and keep them from going to the next job, but they were able to do that. They had leadership support from their community, as I mentioned, and they had community conversations before they got started. And that's typically required when you're using federal funding, is that you have to have some public hearings and some public meetings to talk about what that project is going to look like. And then they had good relationships not only with their local government, but also with state agencies, and we'll see how that comes into play here in a couple of slides. So their initial awards. So we mentioned before, it takes more than just LIHTC to get a project going. So when they originally came in May of 2021, so that is when they first received their LIHTC award, they also received a home loan, which is federal funding, a National Housing Trust Fund loan, which is also federal, and a New Mexico Housing Trust Fund loan, which is state money. All of these loans are very low interest rate loans, so that helps keep costs down. The project also had, in the beginning, it had some conventional financing. It looks like about $430,000 in a conventional loan. And that added up to their total development cost, which did not include the land and the infrastructure that the local governments provided. So now this is what their cheeseburger looked like. And I think, you know, local support sort of being the foundation, because without that, I don't think they would have gotten as, you know, maybe as through these hurdles the way that they were able to do that, because they had that initial investment from their community. They also deferred their part of their developer fee. And that's a common way that developers sort of contribute to any project and sort of bring the costs down. So just when this project was getting started in 2021 was when we were starting to see a lot of the impacts from COVID, and projects started coming back online, but we saw costs really skyrocketing. Costs for labor and for materials went way, way up. And many projects that were in our pipeline just became infeasible immediately after COVID. There were also delays just in getting materials at that time due to supply chain disruptions. And then there was a little bit slower local government response to being able to issue permits and do inspections and those kinds of things as a result of COVID. And as they say, time is money, so that's a big one. So what did this do to the cost? So I'm going to go on this side. So we started with our 6.1 total development costs, and we kind of went through the percentages on what was construction costs, soft costs, other related costs. When they came back to us, the total development had gone from 6.1 to $13.3 million because of all of that. And you can see here the percentage changes in the total development costs. Up here, we had construction at 58%. It went to 62%. Sort of soft other construction costs from 16 to 20%. And so all of these things just added, obviously, more and more to the project. So they were like, oh, shoot, what do we do now? So all the projects basically came back to Housing New Mexico and said, you know, we need help getting these projects over the line. So some of the things that we were able to do was we forward allocated them more tax credits, more of that equity. We were able to increase the loans that we gave them through the gap financing programs that I mentioned before. In this particular project, they were awarded a Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program performance-based loan, which is basically a grant, but they were able to secure that. Value engineered the project to save some costs. So some of the amenities probably got taken out. I think they went from a flat roof to a pitched roof or vice versa, whichever one is less expensive. They went with the other option. So just kind of going back to the plans and saying like, where can we, you know, save some money here? And I'm sure some things got cut. At that time, there was a lot of stimulus money coming to the state, which is how Housing New Mexico was able to help further subsidize these projects. And also the governor's office had some funding through a program called the CASA Connections grant. So they were able to apply for and receive that grant. And then they were also able to get solar tax credits. So they were able to build in some solar components, which not only gave them the tax credit, but also helped them reduce the operating cost. So this is how their capital stack ended up turning out. They actually let go of the conventional loan that they had initially got, and they filled it in with basically other subsidies. So they were able to get to their $13.3 million that they needed to finish the project. And that is the final cheeseburger that came out of this one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 funding sources, and then not to mention the local government support. With each of these funding sources, you have loan documents to sign, you have, you know, regulatory requirements, all of that. So it's a complicated capital stack, but not uncommon. There were a few that were a little bit uncommon from the stimulus funding, but that's what they ended up with. They still only have 32 units though, so it's the same apartments. They went up to $417,000 a unit, which I think we started out at 188 or 186. And rose to $434 a square foot. So huge impact from that particular market event. But in the end, they got it across the finish line. So this is the timeline. And I don't know exactly when they started pre-development, but it had to be as early as 2017, maybe somewhat earlier. They first applied for tax credits in 2019 and were rejected. They applied again and were placed on a wait list. And then finally, they were awarded tax credits in 2021. They got more tax credits in 2022. And then started development, actually construction in 2023. We are going to a ribbon cutting there next week where they will show us the final project, and people are starting to move in, and then the property will remain affordable for 40 years. So some of the lessons learned from this particular project was that, you know, these public land donations really are key to cost containment. And we've talked about some of these already, having those relationships with contractors, equity partners, local governments, syndicators, all of those people that come together to make something work. And then I think the biggest key, and that I saw personally from Vista de Socorro, the developer was persistent and he had contingency plans. He did not give up. Every time we thought, man, he's going to walk away at some point, he did not. He just kept fighting for this project. And so thanks to that, Socorro has 32 brand new affordable housing units coming online in the next month or two. So that's it. I'll turn it over to Izzy for all your technical questions. Thank you, guys.
Do people have questions? Okay, I have a few questions. Let's see. Could you speak to a little more about how it worked deferring the developer fee? It sounds like a lot rests on a developer being very dedicated to a project, and maybe that's more of a moral compass than anything, but maybe there's business sense to it too. So curious about, what is involved in deferring a developer fee?
I think they just take it at the end, right? Instead of taking it up front. Sorry, technical question.
When they defer the developer fee, we do cap the maximum amount that they can receive in developer fee. And we also look at how much the project can afford to pay on operating cost on an annual basis. If they don't meet those thresholds, some of the developers will defer it. That doesn't mean that they never get that developer fee. Actually, by the tax credit law, they have to recoup, or any amount that they defer, they have to get that fee back over the years up to year 15. All of that deferred developer fee has to be paid to the developer. So they're not foregoing it forever. They're foregoing it initially, and then they'll take payments over the next 10, 15 years to get that full developer fee.
Thank you. Last question was, who awards tax credits? I'm curious about if there's political reasoning between the 2019 versus 2020 approval.
So the tax credits are awarded by Housing New Mexico and our board of directors. So we operate the program for the state, and we tweak the qualified allocation plan each year, just based on, again, like what the state's priorities are. And but from a political perspective, the tax credits, we're quasi-governmental, so it doesn't change based on the administration. There has been some discussion about perhaps tax credits, and there's always some discussion about we need more, we're going to have less at a federal level, but they've remained pretty flat, actually, here in New Mexico over the last decade, I would say. And you're right, developers do have to be mission-driven to get through some of these challenges in the projects. Izzy has a comment.
I do want to mention one thing. We really strive to be very fair with a qualified allocation plan and make sure that we follow it to the T. The qualified allocation plan we develop it at the staff level. It gets reviewed by our allocation review committee, which is individuals that are not part of the organization. They're out in the community, and they review that. Our board then approves, and then the governor signs off on that qualified allocation plan on an annual basis. When we review the applications that come in on a very, and you can go on our website right now and look at the qualified allocation plan from last year. From the one from last year, and you'll see all of the scoring criteria. We have staff internally that at least a minimum of 3 staff review each application and grade it independently. Then they come together to make sure that they're in concurrence with what that score should be on that on each of those applications. It gets reviewed then internally by our policy committee, and then it goes to the allocation review committee. Again, people outside of the organization that review that to make sure that we followed everything that the qualified allocation plan says. Then it goes to our board for approval, and from time to time we do have appeals or protests that then we review internally. It goes to the allocation review committee again, and we have an attorney involved in this whole process as well. So it's very competitive, very technical, but we really try not to get politics involved in this. And from time to time, you'll have a politician call and we say, sorry, this is what the qualified allocation plan says, so we're not going to give you additional points because this senator or the governor or somebody called.
Got 2 questions. Or the first one, I know there's a couple of nonprofits in the room that are also talking about transitional housing. Has Housing New Mexico done some of those type of developments?
We do support transitional housing. That's not typically going to be through your LIHTC program, but we do have a lot of federal funding that supports shelters, transitional housing, and some of the more, some of those harder to serve populations.
Now, to put Izzy on the spot, can you give these folks an example of how the town or the county can work with Housing New Mexico? Robin did mention local government, but we can get a little more specific and our county housing guru, he's sitting in the room too. So I can also put him on the spot. But I also think to get folks to make it practical for them of how the town and the county is going to interact with Housing New Mexico.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and then maybe Izzy can add some additional comments. So I think, one thing is just being supportive, right? And wanting to have either whether it's shelter facilities, transitional housing, or affordable housing in your community, and sort of leading by example and making those things happen. As we mentioned here, some examples of how the local governments can get involved. I would also say that how we interact with, say, the city of Las Cruces, they come to us for funding. They also provide municipal funding to projects to sort of leverage some of the funding that we can provide. Are there other things that you can think of?
We oversee the Affordable Housing Act at Housing New Mexico, and that Affordable Housing Act allows local governments to donate land, buildings, infrastructure, or funding towards affordable housing without violating the anti-donation clause. I think the town of Taos and the county both are compliant and have an affordable housing plan and an ordinance that allows them to do that. So that would be one way where the county or the town can allocate any of those resources towards affordable housing. Your question on transitional housing, we definitely have done some of that. This is one example, actually, with the permanent supportive housing units. I think there were 6 units set aside for that. We considered that transitional. We have some that are 100% permanent supportive housing, and we do fund with some of our federal programs, some shelters. And I think Catherine here takes advantage of some of those programs that we have for some of that transitional housing. But I think it's a lot of partnerships with the local governments being involved and supporting the nonprofits in the local area to apply for these funds. And we provide some training and technical assistance at our level to be able to do more of that. One of the things that I didn't mention, and it's actually very foundational for us and very important when I gave my opening remarks, we are one organization stationed or housed there in Albuquerque, but we are a statewide organization, and the only reason that we're able to provide statewide support is we have a strong infrastructure of partners across the state, close to 400 partners that provide the services at the local level, and we rely on them heavily to do that. The areas where we don't have partners is where we suffer and struggle some. So we'd like, in Taos, we have some great partners like in Catherine here, and we hope to get more partners to be able to deliver some of the other programs that I mentioned earlier that aren't being made available here in the county and in the town. But Brent, I'm not sure if that addresses your question.
I have a comment and a question. There were 3 things that really struck me with the presentation. The first one was the 900 pages of documentation, right? And I understand you said that it's not unachievable. People have done it clearly. That is a major burden on anybody who wants to do a project. 900 pages and then this multi-stage process. And I also understand that, you guys aren't in charge of federal regulations and so on and so forth. So no fault there, but I just really wanted to point that out because it really struck me. The second thing that struck me is from beginning to end of this project in Socorro, 10 years. Now, we're in a housing crisis. I know it's not just New Mexico, it's nationwide. We're definitely in a housing crisis in Taos. 10 years to bring units online is just kind of unacceptable. And again, I'm not faulting you guys personally, just making that comment. The third thing that stood out was that the developer stuck with this process all the way through despite all the challenges and issues. And that's great. Most developers probably would not. So when it comes to those regulatory paperwork, 900-page, 10-year burden on a developer, we've got to do something to kind of reduce that, because if you don't have, you mentioned moral compass, if we don't have a developer with some sort of moral compass, or an intention-driven developer, they're going to back off and go where they can actually make money and get the project done, right? So that's just an observation. My question is, going back to the very basics of how this works, the tax credits and the building the equity, can you please explain that to me like I'm a 3-year-old?
I'll try.
Thank you.
So the tax credits are valuable to syndicators, and so they purchase them. So the developer gets an award. In this case, it was, I think, $495,000. That can be taken over 10 years. So what that equates to is $4.9 million that the syndicator will be able to recoup from their initial investment. So they provide the money, they buy the tax credit up front, provide the money to the developer, and then they hold that tax credit for that 10 years and take a percentage of that each year. Investor. Yeah.
The question was, what's another word for syndicator for our recording?
Hi, I just have a comment and a couple of questions too. I live in one of the low-income places in Taos. At the beginning of the year, they got the money, they got the low-income credits 15, 16 years ago. They sent all of us a letter saying, we are not low-income housing. We are affordable housing. Please do not come to the office to discuss it. That's the end of the story. The other thing I thought was left out was not only the developer was affected by COVID, the people trying to move into these places were affected by COVID and less money. And I didn't see the amount of what is the final rent compared to what it originally was. And for instance, where we are, I think they've been there 15 years. So the town might already have to think about, wow, 10 years in or 5 years in, they might just start saying, we're just affordable housing, we're not low-income housing. So you don't even have 10 years to make another place.
Yeah, that's.
I think you left the people out who are moving in. What was the demographics of it? Male, female, children, how many disabled people moved in, what were their incomes, and what actually happened. What does it cost to live there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that comment. And you're absolutely right. The people that are waiting online for those units are definitely impacted. And I think, that's kind of always in the back of our minds as well. We can provide more details about the actual rents at Vista de Socorro, and it's part of the feasibility underwriting that's looked at. I don't know off the top of my head. I was looking at one recently, and we were just in Las Cruces that they had a ribbon cutting. I think for a 1-bedroom apartment, it was around $700 a month, and so that seems like a lot to me. When you're talking about affordable. A lot of times people do have vouchers that do subsidize part, or if not all, some of their rental costs. And so whenever developers can use those project-based vouchers, that's certainly a benefit to the person that lives in those apartments. Thank you. Oh, and Lisa.
I just want to jump in here. There's there's the added piece, so you get the development done. And then there's the whole compliance piece. So when Robin talks about there being a 30 or 40 year back end where that property, that unit, that home is still under a compliance umbrella, I'm going to tell you it's one of the challenges that also happens in this community and also happens in this state and probably also happens all over the country, is sometimes that compliance isn't its best. So I'm just going to say it's one of the things that Taos Housing Partnership is also looking at is how do we start really mapping out what that pipeline is for that year 10 and year 20 and year 30, because we need to keep those units in that affordability threshold. And we also need to make sure that the property manager or development company, if they're still managing that property, is still doing right by the folks who live there. So I want to say that Taos Housing Partnership is not in a great position to sort of do that one-on-one advocacy. If you have that challenge, if you know of people in this community, please contact us. We did engage with a couple folks at Mariposa Apartments just recently. There was a change in the ownership of that property, and what happened is it reset. So there was a whole bunch of disruption happening. Please call us if that happens. I just want to say it's not necessarily something we can fix, but we will definitely try to help advocate with folks and get you in touch with the right people. It's an ongoing thing. Thank you.
And yes, but before we go to your question, I wanted to address your comments, sir, about the timeline, right, and how long it takes. This one obviously had some delays because of COVID, but it's typical probably to have a 5-year development span, which is definitely not quick, but we do this year after year after year. So we have a pipeline of 55 to 60 developments across the state that are always, in one phase of development or another. But you're absolutely right. It would be great to have shortened timelines, less regulatory barriers, less local barriers. All of those things add to the timeline. And so figuring out best policies and best practices to really shrink those timelines, I think, benefits everybody. So thank you for your perspective.
I was just wondering that these tax credits seem like they're dependent on the market or the stock market essentially. And so if the stock market is stable, it would work. What happens if it's volatile?
Yeah, I think in some markets you're just going to get less. So instead of getting 88 cents on the dollar, you might get 78 cents on the dollar, which just shrinks your equity. And then you have to either get higher conventional financing and paying that higher interest rate, or more gap funding, more grants through other resources like Housing New Mexico and others.
On a previous question, there was a subject of what do you do with maintaining these properties. I know of people who are in some of these projects that you have. They're not getting maintenance. They're not.
Yeah, that's certainly something that would concern us. So we, for the compliance period, for the LIHTC or whatever the funding source is, Housing New Mexico has staff that go out and look at these properties. And we make sure that these companies are maintaining them up to the regulatory standard that's required by the funding source. They should also have reserves in place. So if they need to replace a roof or something has come up that needs to be dealt with, that they have some funding in place to do that. They can approach us, and we do lending on those types of things, preservation loans to help these communities, keep the property maintained. But it's a fair point, and I think if there are issues, you should report them either through Lisa or through Housing New Mexico, and we can investigate them. To either Lisa with the Taos Housing Partnership, who's here locally, and then you can also contact Housing New Mexico. And if it's a property that we oversee the compliance for, we can investigate. We don't have authority over every single affordable housing complex or in the state, but if it's something that we do have compliance over, we definitely want to ensure that it's being maintained.
I just wanted to add to your question before. One of the pieces to me that's really exciting and probably made this particular project so much more complicated was that I believe you said they have 100% project-based vouchers for all the 32 units. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure if
that's
it's
what I've seen.
100%, but there's some.
Right. They have a huge number, and the Housing Authority was one of the partners, right? And so I know you mentioned the project-based vouchers, but I wanted to make sure to explain that means that when people are moving into those units with the vouchers, they're not actually paying the rent that's assigned based on the tax credit. They're paying a rent based on their income. So like these units, when the ones that have the vouchers assigned to them, you could be getting just SSI or SSDI, and you're just paying roughly a third of that amount for your rent. And then the financing for this project is what's making up the difference, because for a lot of folks, that like just the utility bills alone are going to be more than that amount. So that I really have appreciated seeing this project evolve over time and being really truly affordable, even when you have a very low income.
I have several questions. I'm going to use the 6 million figure to begin with. You said that was broken down into 70 in terms of percentages: 74, 12, 2.3, and 10.9 approximately. And the developer's fee at 10.9% would be in the neighborhood of $600,000. I don't understand that. Can you explain that? You showed the burger, and the burger was 10 point, or you showed a breakdown of the burger is a 10.9% developer fee based on $6,161,174.
So your question is,
At 10% of 6 million is 616,000.
yeah, so I think they deferred a portion of that. I'm trying to find the slide.
That's really important to know. That the developer fee is not 253,000, but it's 616,000 or whatever it is.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. And then later on, in terms of soft cost, and maybe you can quickly remind me, you said attorneys, and there were a couple of other categories in terms of soft costs. What were those one or two other?
I think consultants.
That's what I thought. That's all
yeah.
I need to know. Consultants. Okay. So it was 12% of the 6 million or some dollars. Then we get to the 13 million. The problem of $13 million, and the soft costs go from to 16 to 20%. Why would the soft cost go up by more than half again, by more than 50%? Is there some reason for that?
I think in this particular scenario, one of the reasons for that might be the additional funding sources that had to be obtained. So we started out with 6 and we jumped to 9. So that might be a part of it. And
each one of those is going to have their attorneys and their consultants and yada, yada, yada. Okay, that's all I need to know. Now I'd like to go back to the very beginning. And you said for every dollar of explain to me the 80. You get 85. I'm going to use percentages. You get 85% of equity of the 100% tax credit, right? So how? Tell me how that works. You've got. Let's go to the 495,000. There was a question about value to syndicators, investors. And you said it's $495K over 10 years. It's not $495K over 10 years. It's $495K each year. It's $4,950,000. That's the value to investors. So explain to me, I'm not sure how whether it's 80% or 85% or 78% or 88%, 88 cents on the dollar. The qualified allocation, that so the $4,950,000 to the investor, though that's the value of the credits, right?
Correct.
And the state, New Mexico Housing or MFA, decided at some point that we can allocate $4,950,000 to this project in terms of support, correct?
So the allocation comes from the federal government. So
Okay.
as a state, it's a formula grant, right? And so each state gets an allocation of tax credits. Ours is around between $5 and $6 million a year that we have at our disposal to allocate to these projects. So if I'm a developer and I'm trying to build these units, I need money up front. A syndicator will come in and say, I'll give you, for every dollar, I'll give you 85 cents up front, and I'll wait to make my full dollar with interest for 10 years. So the benefit is that the developer can have the money in hand to go and build the units, and the syndicator, the investor, is used to waiting, right? That's their model. They buy these tax credits, and they claim them every year for 10 years, and get their money back plus some.
That's a wonderful explanation, a simple explanation. If you could somehow
Put that on a hamburger.
put that in your head, and if you could remember it. I mean, the idea that you start out with the feds allocating monies to the state then decides how to allocate those monies. The investors come in and buy the total amount, $1, and they give 88 or 78 cents or whatever to the developer to get them started. And then over time, the investor, the syndicator, and that syndicator word comes from way back when in the 16th, 15th, 16th century, and the idea of being a syndicator and a syndicate, whether it's mafia or not. I'm grateful for that explanation about how one achieves equity. And it's not, and there's a difference between the developer syndicator, or I mean the syndicator investor, the developer, and then those are two big questions as far as I'm concerned. And it seems to me that as a local government that we can be both investor and syndicator and developer, and that we as a community can, in doing that, can get away from all of these other soft costs. I truly believe that communities can build houses on their own, whether it's through we have state law that allows affordable housing for each community to establish affordable housing offices and agencies. I think that's most of my questions. There was one about both the Mr. Hernandez and you talked about permanent support, 100% support for permanent housing. Explain that for me. I mean, in the sense that most of these housing developments have 10, 20, 30, 40 years of required affordability or whatever. So what's the permanent housing part?
So permanent supportive housing is a term that's just kind of used to describe a situation where you have not only the housing component of it, but you also have the supportive services side of it. So you have case managers on site who help people navigate whatever it is that they need to navigate, whether that's severe mental illness, whether that's helping them find a job, helping them get a driver's license, all the things that, certain populations in our state sort of need help with. So you have to pay that person. And so the operational costs of providing a case management component to housing increases the cost. Those are built in up front, whether it's by the vouchers or, whatever the funding source is, to have that person or that support there so people can maintain their housing. We do hear from time to time that, somebody that's been living in a situation where they're homeless may have a hard time acclimating into an environment like an apartment complex, right? And so they need support to do that. And there's a myriad of other ways that that these communities support their residents, depending on the populations that they're targeting.
That's good to know. I think maybe the last question about compliance is a challenge. Compliance isn't always its best. It seems to me that that we as a community should say to those who build these complexes that you write it into the you just say, listen, if you try to change this, we're going to toss you out. You're going to lose everything. We will consider you a scumbag, and that you're gone. That's it. You can't do what this gentleman is suggesting is being done. It's as simple as that. So I'll end there.
Okay, thank you. And I will say that, 20, 30 years ago, maybe, there were shorter compliance periods that ended at 15 years. We've changed it so that we don't deal with that, but I understand some, communities that are going to have those shorter compliance periods. Typically, they're okay. I'll let Izzy say.
Can you repeat the?
We have not seen, I don't see a reason that they wouldn't be, but we haven't seen an instance here in New Mexico where we have the county being the investor in those tax credits. For one, I don't know that the county pays federal taxes, and so you have to have tax liability to take advantage of the federal low-income housing tax credit. No, but the county or the municipality can be the owner of the apartment complex that is built. But you would typically get an investor that is going to have tax liability that these tax credits would be valuable to them. Yeah.
I think we heard maybe around 5 to 6 million in the total allocation pool for the state from the Fed per year, and roughly speaking, it was about $500,000 on this on Socorro project. Is that right? And that's the initial, and that's allocated annually. Is that right? Over 10 years?
So in this particular development here, our board allocated it once. They did come back and ask for some additional tax credits, so that increased it some. So it's only one allocation, but you really multiply that 495,000 times 10, so it's $4.9 million. The investor in this case, every year they have $495,000 as a tax credit that when they're going to have to pay their taxes to the federal government, they say we have a tax credit of $495,000, so they don't have to pay. If they have $1 million tax liability, they can subtract the $495 from that, and they're only paying $510 to the feds every year. And every year they have that tax credit that they can use for 10 years.
So on a basic level, does that 5 to 6 million reset for new projects each year then, or do projects that were awarded in the past continue to draw from that pool?
No, every year we get a new allocation, and we'll just say $6 million, and it increases a little bit with population. And here in New Mexico, it has not increased a whole lot, but every year we allocate, let's say, $6 million to 4, 5, 6 different developments across the state.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that I'll say as a closing comment here, if there's no other questions, is that
Lisa has a question.
okay.
So I've been fielding my phone. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask a couple. So pre-development, we saw that initial timeline. I'll just give you the cut to the chase. That timeline is one of my favorite ones when we go, oh, look at that, started conversation 2017 and you're breaking ground in 2025. I love the hamburger, by the way. But this one to me is like, yep, here we go. I had 2 questions about this one. Is there funding resources that you are aware of that really can be utilized for feasibility and for pre-development? That's question 1.
We at Housing New Mexico do not currently have monies for pre-development. So this is something that, you know, the developer, the nonprofit that's looking at doing this, and in a lot of cases it's going to be a developer, a for-profit developer that'll partner with a nonprofit, and they are the ones that come up with that $40,000, $50,000 to start doing a lot of this pre-development work.
Okay. I'm curious about the wait list. So this particular application was placed on a wait list in 2020. Do you typically, is that unusual to have things on a wait list, or was this COVID specific?
I'll say that it's not, it's very typical that a developer will come in and put an application in and not get funded the first time around. So this is coming back 3 times. I would say that happens fairly frequently, only because it's so competitive and there's a limited amount of tax credits. The very well-versed developers that have done this for many, many years, they can come in and they can score high, and they have to hit, if you go and look at our QAP, it'll tell you where the points are, and they're very good at being able to find the piece of land that's going to get them the most points and target the population. It was said the wait list itself, we generally have people on the wait list because there's more demand for these tax credits than there's tax credits available. So if they meet all of the qualifications, but they just didn't make the cut at getting part of that $6 million, we'll put them on a wait list in case the development falls out for one reason or another, and then the next in line would go up. And we've done that from time to time. These are very valuable, and we normally, when they get these tax credits, they're going to hang on to them and make sure that they see it through the finish line. But we have had occasions where, for one reason or another, they're not able to see it through the finish line. They return the tax credits, and we go to the next in line.
Okay. So this is a question that came in to me earlier, and someone wanted me to ask. So thank you for mentioning the affordability piece, because what happens a lot is we talk about affordable, and we talk about workforce, and we talk about this. So are you aware of any models for affordable rental development that don't use LIHTC? This is the stump the chump. I didn't mean to say you're a chump. This is like that moment of like, whoa, because these are the questions that come up. Is if LIHTC's not the avenue, the only avenue? So what is there?
It is not the only avenue, but it is, and I think there was one of the initial slides that Robin put up. I think nationwide, the tax credits fund about, was it 80 or 90% of all the affordable? But we have one example. We were just at a groundbreaking a couple of months ago in Las Cruces, Amador Crossing, where they did not want to do tax credits, but what that required was more the local government, City of Las Cruces. In that case, I think they donated the land. They had some trust fund money from the local community that they granted, and they came to us for some other funding. They got some funding from the state as well on the Casa Connect to make it all fit, but they didn't have any federal funding in that, and that worked for them.
Okay. And then the other question, and this is really specific to workforce rental housing models. Anything that you're aware of that is really specific to how to incentivize for developers to come into rural resort communities?
I think, did you have an answer? And so I mentioned earlier the Affordable Housing Act and how local governments can donate land or building or infrastructure for that. So we've seen a lot of local governments do that, and they put out an RFP and say, we have X number of acres available, and put a proposal together on what you would develop here, or at what cost you can develop, and then they make it competitive, and then they award the piece of land, if you will, to that developer that's going to build the affordable units, whether it's multifamily or single family, and we've seen that done in many different places. Hobbs has a very good track record of doing something like that in Lee County. Albuquerque does some of that with their workforce housing money that they have. So communities are doing that to incentivize developers to come in and do some of that.
Okay, great. I'm looking at the time, and I know Alexandra has the big, exciting reveal. And then I have a couple of really just kind of ending remarks.
If I could just make one more comment. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your engagement. Really appreciate it. I also wanted to acknowledge our board chair, Angel Reyes, is here in the room as well, and appreciate him so much for supporting us and just coming tonight. So thank you, Chair Reyes.
I had one comment to make as well, and it's we don't want to scare you away. This program here in the 900 pages that Robin mentioned, I told her to say 899 so it wouldn't scare anybody away. But this is the most technical program, and it's a federal program, so it requires a lot. We have many other programs that do not require 900 pages of application, and one of them is managed in Robin's department, the Housing Innovations Program. That you may get away with maybe a 10-page application on something like that. So I would encourage you guys to go to our website and look at the various programs that we have. I mentioned we have 40 of them, from homelessness to home ownership, rehab, weatherization, single-family development, multifamily development without tax credits. So a lot of different, we have a zero-interest home builder program to incentivize builders to build entry-level homes. So many different opportunities out there, and this, don't let this scare you away. This is the most difficult one, and it requires a lot of technical expertise and partnerships to do that. Oh, I'll let Angel speak here too.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Angel Reyes. I'm the president of Sentinel Bank across the street. I'm also the chairman of Housing New Mexico. And so appreciate everybody's attendance, participation, engagement, and questions. And is the context of why I wanted to just make a few comments. There's some great questions here, but we often can leave here either confused or misinformed and be able to like create more worry or concern with all this information. Director Hernandez is absolutely correct. This is probably the most complicated project. A couple of things as I'm listening, I just wanted to share because of the gentleman in the back, I think had some really good comments in trying to simplify some of what we do. And I appreciate your comments on process and documentation. And what we have engaged to do, one is a board and strategically with the leadership team, is improve the efficiency of the operations where it's possible. In some cases, a lot of these things are required for the federal funding purposes. And that's a hard thing to move. But we do our best to advocate, support. We hold developer forums. We hold a whole set of meetings to engage communities throughout the state to be well informed. Because what we want to see, Izzy made this comment, over 400 partners throughout the state. We want to create more capacity because MFA, or Housing New Mexico, is not the ultimate deliverer of the service. We need to find partners to create these services. And so that's a role that we're really playing. When we're talking about these low-income housing tax credits in this formula, it's based on the population of New Mexico. And it's a population times a rate. So when the population in New Mexico remains steady or even declining, as we're seeing in these numbers, then the formula or the allocation of dollars remains the same or it becomes lower. And that really connects with the whole process that the demand way out exceeds the capital that's there. Wanted to clarify a comment on the tax credits. I heard some comments about tax credits, 85%, 88%, and stock market. The tax credits are not tied to the stock market. And really what they're tied to is the market that has an interest in receiving a tax credit on a tax return. And so a lot of the buyers of tax credits are corporations that have large corporate tax liability. And so that's influenced by tax rates or tax discussions that are occurring at the national level. So as tax rates increase, the demand for tax credits increases. As tax rates decrease, well, the demand decreases because a company's not going to pay as much tax. So that, that several years ago, the tax credits were closer to $1, $1.10 when tax rates were higher. So that's what influences tax rates. And I know we've talked about syndicators and investors. It's a whole team collaborating the capital stack, and the burger's the example. And so a syndicator, you can call it the quarterback. The quarterback is trying to figure out how to get all different sources of capital to make the deal work. As we're talking about equity, the tax credits are the largest component of equity, the largest outside allocation, imported equity into the state of New Mexico to lower the cost of that development to make it affordable. And so it's not perfect, but it's the system that we have, and it's a very complicated system. As Director Hernandez pointed out, it's a very competitive process, so you have very seasoned developers that know the process. It's based on a scoring model, and so it's a very technical process. What else did I want to just share real quick? Did I leave my phone? Sorry, just going to try to clarify a couple points here. To Lisa's question on projects that don't involve tax credits or gap financing, it's finding somebody who maintains a real interest and commitment to the mission of supporting that housing, because either they have the capital that they're willing to invest, or they have to borrow at rates that they have to still pay a contractor, they still have to pay all these folks, even if they didn't have to do this, and are they willing to get their capital back with a lower rent model? So I think that's where it becomes an issue, is like, where do we find people that maintain an altruistic viewpoint to support housing? And I think my last point, the success in my role, and I'll just step back a second. There's been a lot of things talked about. I've had the opportunity to be on the board since 2011. I've been the chairman since 2019, but I was also the allocation review chairman, so I had the chance to go through this process. And what I would say to some questions about the process, the staff is incredible on how they work with developers to make this work. There was a question about politics. I think Director Hernandez answered that correctly. It is a very objective process with a lot of independent parties that are essentially evaluating the scoring criteria to make sure that the points that are awarded are following the guidelines. And so I just wanted to make that point. And then finally, what I see as success with these projects are strong public-private partnerships. No one entity will do this on its own, not a private company or just a public company, or a public entity. It takes strong public-private partnerships. And to the point of timeframes, yeah, these are things that don't happen in a year, but they also don't have to take 10 years and they don't have to take 5 years. There are projects that have been done, and they've been done in shorter periods. They're well organized, they're well supported, there's strong local commitment, and the developer has got their capital stacks put in place. They're well organized. When those things line up, those projects move faster than what maybe we're seeing in an example. I think the example's important to recognize that things do happen along the way. And one last thing I'll make a comment about this project, and to the gentleman's point, at the end, the staff recommended, the board approved, essentially taking tax credits from a current year and moving that forward, so that project got more tax credits. So there's more equity, more gap financing, which meant less hard debt, which kept those units affordable. And it takes a lot of creativity in the whole process. It's a huge collaboration. So thank you for letting me talk for 5 minutes. Any questions that you guys have, you can give them to Izzy and Robin. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Angel. I'm just going to say, so Taos Housing Partnership, and I think everyone in this room can be committed to, let's create that perfect storm that says, let's get something like this done in 3 years. How about that? Let's just do it. Okay, we're good. I'm going to let Alexandra close us up, but I have 3 requests of all of you. When you leave here tonight, you're going to go by the dessert table. You're going to take a bag, and you're going to take some cookies home, because we don't want to take them back to our car. And then, so just to let you know, I have brown paper bags. There's sort of some yellow markers on this. It's because I collect dandelions, so just so you know, these are clean. They just have dandelions. There's also Ziploc bags. Please take those. My other 2 requests are speaker series flyers. The way we get word out is when people are spreading the word. So there are flyers on the table. Please take 1, 2, 5, a whole stack if you can get them out. Our next speaker series session is on June 18th. and Alexander's going to tell you what that's about. And then there is a new flyer we have for our Housing Advocacy and Learning Group. I know several of you here in the front row attend that regularly. Thank you. Tuesday, May 20th, really good discussion. A lot of the things that come out of these sessions transfer in there, or stuff that's coming from those sessions get speakers on our list. So it's a very dynamic process. And oh my gosh, we're going to spin the wheel.
I know, but nobody knows what number they are,
Yes.
so it loses
Thank
some
you
of
for
the-
coming.
the
Come
thrill.
next time. Any questions, email us, call us, any of that stuff. Again, thank you, Brent. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, Izzy.
I just wanted to, while the wheel spins, it's 8. Scott, is you. So I just wanted to say a little bit about our next speaker series. I'll keep it quick. This one is going to be really fantastic, as they all have been. This is going to be a little bit more of an overview. We have a professor from UNM in Albuquerque, Renya Ehrenfeucht. I believe that's how you pronounce her. Is that how you pronounce her name? Erin what? Foyt? My apologies to Renya, who's not here. But she is a professor in the urban planning department there at UNM. And so she's going to be talking about a lot of the big picture, like why as a country are we in a housing crisis right now? What are some of the myths about affordable housing that keep it from being built in the way that we need it to be built? So if this is like about a very specific, really important program, really actionable. This next one is going to be sort of like the big picture, sort of contextualizing a lot of the stuff that we talk about. So I hope to see you there next month. And if you do want to come to the Housing Advocacy Group, it's meeting next Tuesday, the 20th. We're going to be talking about a lot of the things that were brought up here. If people have more questions, other things they want to discuss, we're also going to talk about the last speaker series with Daniel Werwath talking about state policy. So I hope to see you there. Oh, when? It's May 20th, which is next Tuesday at 5:30, and it is at Taos Housing Partnerships office, which is at 524 Paseo del Pueblo Sur, Unit H. We have flyers, and you can get in touch. Thank you all so much for being here.